Hey, what's up everyone? Kevin here. In this video, I want to share with you guys how to properly set up your snowboard bindings before your first day of snowboarding. There's a lot of things you want to get right on your stance. You want it to be the right width. You want to have the proper angles on your bindings for your style of riding, that all your straps fit properly. You need to adjust your high backs, and you also want to make sure that your boots are centered over your snowboard. Let's jump into all that right now so that you can get it all dialed in before your first day of snowboarding. The first thing you want to do is just get your bindings onto your snowboard. And you'll notice that there's actually recommended holes to start with on your board. So there's 2 reference holes right here. And on this side, this is the reference stance as well. This is a good place to start with your board, just getting your bindings onto the board in the reference spot. And when placing your bindings onto your board, you always want to make sure that the thick straps are on the inside. This can also be a good time to set your angles for the first time as well. A good general, I think, angle to start with that's easy is to put the front foot at 18 degrees. And I'm going to put the screws in, but I'm not going to do them really tight because we're probably going to have to move this binding or make some kind of adjustment. Going to place the back binding into the reference spot. So the angles that I like for a directional stance is to have -9 in the back foot and +18 in the front foot. This gives you a more directional stance, making it easier to ride in one direction. If you have a park snowboard and you like riding the terrain park and riding switch, then I would recommend a more twin stance, something like -15 in the back and +15 in the front. The next thing you want to check is the width of your bindings. A good kind of general rule is to take your arm and from your elbow to your fist, it should fit in between your bindings. Right now, mine's a little bit small, so that means I might have to widen it slightly. If your stance is too wide, you're gonna feel like you're stuck and you can't bend your knees properly or steer with your knees. And if it's too narrow, then you're gonna miss out on stability and you're gonna feel like you're gonna tip over easily. So a stance that's comfortably wide, but still allows you to move your knees and steer. Once you get the width of your stance in place, you can then get a measuring tape and measure from the center of one disc to the center of the other. And then with that measurement, you'll know what your stance width is for any time you need to set up your board. My stance width is about 21.5 inches across, but that changes slightly depending on the conditions and the type of riding I'm doing. The other thing you want with your stance is you do want your stance to be set back slightly towards the tail of your board. With a smaller tail, it's gonna make turning easier. If you're a park rider, that's when you wanna set your bindings up completely twin, then you can ride the board in either direction and it's gonna feel the same. Before I adjust my stance at all, I'm first gonna adjust my high back angles. So this high back adjustment usually comes set to 0, but you can typically set it from 0 to 6. And what that does is it changes the angle of your high back. With an angle more forward, then when you go to engage your heel edge, it's gonna happen sooner. With the forward leaning high back though, this can cause some discomfort if it's too far forward, or it can make your board too aggressive. So some people actually like to have it at 0 if you want that more loose feeling. But as a general rule, I like to set mine about halfway. And then if you want to adjust it based on preference afterwards, you can do that. So I'm going to loosen off the high back adjustment. Then where you put the screw is going to determine the angle of your high back. So I'm going to go about halfway. And with it halfway, you can see some of these plastic teeth that hold it on are exposed. We'll do the exact same on this one. So now with your high backs a little bit forward, when you go to press on your high back, it's going to initiate your heel edge earlier, getting you onto that heel much faster. If you want a looser feeling ride, that's when you want your high back to be more straight up and down. Then when you go to initiate, it's going to happen a lot slower and just give you that kind of more looser, playful feeling on your board. The next thing you want to do is actually put your snowboard boot into your binding and make sure that your straps are all gonna fit. So these straps usually come a little bit small. So depending on the size of your boot, you want to put your boot in and make sure that the straps fit. So as you can see, this heel strap is definitely looking a little bit small and the toe strap is a little bit small too. I want this to be a bit more centered. Same, you can see that the heel strap is thicker here and thinner in the middle. So I want this thin piece to be more directly in the middle of my snowboard boot. Just gonna loosen off the toe strap. I'm gonna make it one screw hole bigger, put it back on, nice and tight. And then the same thing with the ankle strap. Gonna loosen it off and then slide it out to make it that much bigger so that it fits more centered on my boot. Okay, so let's test this out again. So now you can see the straps, they just look much more centered. You got the thick part of the strap on the outside, thin on the inside, and same with the toe strap. You can see that this is all centered up now, giving me much more of a better 3D comfortable fit. As you can see with this strap, it's really designed to be centered. So you've got the narrowest part in the middle. You want to center it up as much as possible so that the thinnest point is centered on your snowboard boot. Before I take my boot out, I also want to make sure that my boot is centered on my board. So with my boot, I want my toe to be sticking out the same amount as my heel. And right now I can see that my heel is actually sticking out a little bit further than my toe. So I'm going to take my boot out. So you can see here on these screws, I can move them forward or back and actually center my binding more on my snowboard so I have the same amount of heel overhang as toe overhang. So I'm going to move all these screws back one so that my binding is a little bit more forward towards that toe edge. I also remember that I need to make my stance slightly wider, so I'm going to put my binding one screw hole back. So now by moving my binding a little bit more towards my toe edge, my boot is going to sit centered, keeping my weight more centered over my board. So then when I do my turns, the amount of toe overhang and heel overhang is going to be roughly the same. This board's pretty wide, so I'm not afraid of anything dragging in the snow. But if you have bigger feet, then you really want that to be centered so that you don't get any heel or toe drag. You can also adjust this part of your binding as well. So on the clue bindings, there are 5 adjustment points. So you can move this padding forward or backwards depending on the size of your boot. Because my boots are closer to the larger side of this binding, I do have it set forward, but you can also set this padding back as well. Finally, it's good to just stand in your stance, feel it out, make sure it's comfortable, and you can bend your knees comfortably, move back and forth. It's also a good idea whenever you go out snowboarding, just to go over all the screws, make sure everything is tight and snug. That way you don't have to do it on the mountain. So I hope that this helps with your stance setup. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. I'll also put links to my gear in the description. Have fun with your snowboarding, and I'll see you in the next video.